tonight is the soul of meditation and the power of the mind and how it actually is so strong in Judaism. Now, what I do want to say in the outset, what this course is not. This is not going to be a mini retreat on meditation. It's not going to be something that we're going to sit here and meditate for an hour and a half. But we will be talking about what meditation is and have a few video meditation presentations, which will give us a way to practice it. But in order to do that, tonight will be more of an introductory kind of presentation with some exercises as well. The truth of the matter is that meditation, the word meditation, comes from the Latin word, which actually means to measure or to think, to contemplate, to devise, to ponder. So the truth of the matter is that people meditate all the time. Whenever you're engrossed in thought, you're thinking about something, you're involved in an idea, that is a form of meditation. The meditation that has become very popular is what we call transcendental meditation, or meditation where you transcend your being. So I want to put out another point that I'll probably repeat again as we go further. The conventional wisdom of meditation is the idea of escaping. And the reason that is what the question is, why would people meditate? Why do people meditate? And the question is, why are you all taking the course of meditation? What is it in meditation that's intriguing you that you want to be part of it? And it could be because people are looking for relief. People are looking for an escape. What were you going to say?
I'm looking for a connection between meditation and prayer.
Meditation and prayer. We're going to talk about that soon.
People looking for truth.
People looking for truth. And folks that are on the virtual, you definitely, please don't hesitate to unmute yourself or chat, because this is not a conversation just for people here. We have everybody involved in the class. It's really a rhetorical question more than looking for an answer. Some people are looking for the truth, and this is something which we're actually going to talk about. But here's a point that I want to make on the outset. Most meditations that you find in Eastern culture is a meditation that allows you to transcend from your current state and enter into another state. So therefore, the emphasis is a lot of emptying your mind and focusing on nothingness. Jewish meditation is very, very different. It is also filled with mindfulness, but it's focused on something strong and something positive, as we will soon see. And we will go through all the exercises. So when we talk about meditation, meditation in Judaism, the truth is that it goes back to the very beginning of Jewish life. The first one to introduce Judaism into the world was Abraham. Abraham was the first one who discovered God on his own. Remember that the biblical story of the creation of Adam and Eve, they sensed the presence of God. Even Noah sensed the presence of God. Abraham came to recognize God by rejecting idols and then accepting God. And then God revealed himself to him. But Abraham, how did he come to the recognition of God? It wasn't by God first speaking to him. It came through meditation. And his meditation was a calculus. He was calculating. He came to the conclusion that the world wasn't self-made. He came to realize that there is a master of the universe, but he didn't know who the master was. So he was looking to see who's the most powerful that controls, sustains the world. Now, on a bright sunny day, especially in the Middle East, a little bit here in the South, but definitely in the Middle East, what is the most powerful entity that occupies you? That's the sun. It's very hot, it's very warm, it's very bright. And he thought maybe it's the sun. But then he realized the sun sets at night, maybe it's the moon. Until he came through a process of elimination to the discovery that God is invisible and God transcends any corporal or physical being. So that came through meditation. And it wasn't only Abraham, it was Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob and Rachel and Leah, that they constantly meditated. It says that their profession was that they were shepherds. Why were they shepherds? Why weren't they architects or builders or physicians like their descendants in later generations? It was because they wanted to seclude. As we're going to see a reading, I'm going to ask you to open up your book to text number 3. This text was written by a great scholar.
Do you mind in text display out here?
Sorry about that. This was written by a great scholar in the 17th and 18th century who lived in Turkey. He was a commentator on a lot of Jewish ideas. And his name was Rabbi Leoah Cohen Hamitari. So he writes the following, we'll read it in English. The patriarchs chose to be shepherds so that they could be alone in the wilderness, where the air is clean and pure, so they would be far from other people for the sake of secluding themselves in divine meditation. So what you find here is that the description of the patriarchs, going back to the very beginning, was that they meditated, but their meditation was through seclusion, which that is one form of meditation, which we will see in a few moments. Page 3, I'm sorry. Text 1, I am sorry, I apologize. Text 1, we're going to get to text 3 soon. Thanks, Rabbi Cohen, for correcting me on that. So this talks about a kind of meditation which is called the meditation of seclusion. We're going to get to that soon. Meditation, what is the meditation aspect that the patriarchs practiced? It was deep contemplation, because the idea of seclusion, as we're soon going to see, is not for the point of being empty, but being undistracted. Today, a form of seclusion is telling people to shut their computers, their devices, and their cell phones, and to have peace and quiet. But what's the purpose of the peace and quiet? The purpose of the peace and quiet is not just to have the quiet itself, because eventually emptiness doesn't lead you anywhere. So it has to be focusing on something positive and strong that you can fill yourself with, that gives you a way to connect, which brings us to the next one. So the first one was the patriarchs. The second one is the idea of prayer, which you mentioned before, the idea of prayer. Now, it's interesting that when you look at the word tefillah, which is on your slide, tefillah means to pray, there's 2 aspects of tefillah. One is hatofel kli, someone that patches up a vessel, something that we study today in Maimonides, for those that study 3 chapters of Maimonides every day, where it speaks about a vessel that became unclean and then it broke into pieces. So it loses its state of uncleanliness. And then when you patch it together, you glue it together, it becomes a new vessel and it's no longer unclean. So the idea of connection, connecting shards together, is the word tofel, right? So one of the ideas of tefillah is to connect, which means that we are building and cementing a relationship with God. So that's a form of meditation. And we're soon going to see that it takes a lot of preparation and practice to be able to experience that. Another idea of tefillah is the idea of judgment, the idea of self-examination. When a person stands before God, one of the things that they recognize is that you can't fool God. You can present yourself in front of people in any which way you choose. You can present yourself in front of strangers in a certain way. But when you stand before God, there's nowhere to hide. Your true essence is exposed. You know, it's like when you go to the airport, you go through a body scanner so they can see everything that's on you in your pockets. When you're standing before God in prayer, you're actually entering into a soul scanner. So the idea is that at that time, we are honest with ourselves. So the connection is through meditation. So the meditation touches on two things. First of all, contemplating who we are, the smallness of the human being and the vastness of God. Also recognizing that God is a forgiving God, and then learning about the greatness of God. And that allows us to have the relationship with God. So when we talk about meditation, meditation is a very important part of the Jewish experience, because when we say prayer, now, of course, the word prayer is not the proper translation for the word tefillah, because prayer means to beg. So if someone is in a crisis mode and someone is desperate and they come to synagogue and they pray to God, they don't need any meditation. They're at that time experiencing a tremendous need, and they believe that God can deliver them from their needs. So therefore, they're standing in the synagogue and they're connecting with God out of need. But if someone doesn't feel that, and someone is coming to pray because that's the Jewish thing to do, so how do they connect? What's the form that they use in being able to connect with God? So just reciting the words is meaningless, and especially since the text and the liturgy of the prayer is actually the same that you recite every day. So for that, you need to have what's called meditation. What is the meditation? You have to have a focal point of study. It's an intellectual exercise. And that's where we take you to text 2 on page 5, where the Gemara, the Talmud in Brachot says a fascinating statement. It says, one must approach prayer with reverence. What does it mean with reverence? What does it mean with reverence? And actually, the Hebrew doesn't even say from reverence. It says koved rosh, with a heaviness of the head. What does the heaviness of the head mean? You recognize that you are carrying a huge responsibility here. You're doing something extraordinary. Imagine if you're given an audience with the king, you're giving an audience with the president, or you're giving an audience with someone that's very powerful, and you want to make a connection. So it's not going to be a casual meeting. You're going to prepare yourself. You're going to train your mind exactly what words you're going to say. You're going to think about it. Here, when we come to prayer, so prayer, this is actually not a course on prayer, but it's just to use the meditative aspect of prayer. So in the meditative aspect of prayer, there is this deep contemplation. And the deep contemplation is that you have to really think about it. Now, one can prepare themselves like a fool, or one can prepare themselves in a smart way. The previous Rebbe writes in his memoirs that there was a man that wanted to approach God with reverence every day. So he would try to meditate, and he would meditate on the small village that he lived in, that what was the greatest threat to the village? The great threat to the village was that if there were wild bison or buffalo roaming around, and they could hit someone or gore someone with their horns. So what he would do is he would meditate as if there was 1, 2, 10, a whole herd of buffalo coming through the town. And then the creator of the buffalo came to town, and all of a sudden he had reverence. And the previous Rebbe writes, that's the foolish way of instilling reverence in a person. It's not about being afraid of God. Reverence is recognizing the holiness and the vastness of godliness, and how we, small human beings, even though we have brains, but compared to God, who's infinite or beyond infinite, and we're finite, and yet we have the privilege of being able to connect. That is a meditative practice. And then the Mishnah continues, and the Mishnah says the early pious sages would pause and thought for 1 hour so they could focus their hearts on God and only then pray. So what would they do? And this actually is a practice even in Chabad, in the Chabad Hasidic rituals. And you still see some people doing it. And in the olden days, it was very, very common. There were Hasidim that would rise early in the morning, like 4 or 5 in the morning, and they would go into a cold, freezing body of water, which was a mikvah. So they would wake up and be refreshed, and then they would study Hasidic theology and philosophy, the deep esoteric concepts of Torah, for about an hour or two, and really study it in depth to try to understand it, not to just recite words. And then once they understood it, they would sit down for another hour and review it in their mind and focus on it. And then only then would they start their prayer. And whatever they studied in the prayers before, in their studies before the prayer, that became the focal point of their prayer. And it was able to express itself in the words that they said. And that's why they saw the words of prayer with so many new layers and so many deeper layers, that it was just a fascinating experience. It was a tremendous journey for them. It was exhausting. It was tiring, but it was refreshing at the same time. And it was meaningful. So that's the idea of meditation when it comes to prayer. So meditation is definitely a very important part of Jewish experience. So there's no question about that. Not everybody can afford the time to meditate that much every day. Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi wrote in one of the letters that was published in the Tanya that on Shabbat, people should spend more time in meditative study so they can spend more time in meditative prayer, because they don't have the burden of going to work on Shabbat. For that reason, universally in Chabad, the prayers would start at 10 o'clock to give people time to study in the morning. And when you walk into authentic Chabad synagogues or Chabad study halls, you see that the hall is packed with people and they're studying, and then they start the meditative process of prayer. So here you have 2 examples of meditation in Judaism, that they're all focal points in how to connect. One was the first case that we spoke about, which was the patriarchs, and then it was through prayer. So now let's go into Jewish meditation, and then we're going to open up, because there are different forms of meditation, and it's important for us to understand what we're dealing with and what we're not dealing with. So there are 3 categories of meditation. The first category of meditation, which is the most well-known form of meditation, which is the Eastern culture of meditation, a lot of it deals with idol worship. And that's why we call it foreign ideas. They'll focus on a deity or the name of a deity. They'll chant the name of the deity, and they would sort of get caught up with that, and then they meditate. So the problem with that is in Judaism, that it's a form of idol worship. And idol worship is a major no-no in Judaism. So therefore, the idea of idol worship kind of meditation is totally unacceptable. Then there's something which is called neutral. Neutral is also a very popular form of meditation. And the neutral is really a meditation practice that has no religious goals. It is also not based on any religious ideas. They're strictly designed to allow people to relax, to help people feel a sense of gratitude, or to better themselves. If somebody wants to be a better athlete, they find that through meditation, these meditative practices, they can actually enhance their performance, or many other things. And some of them may even be floating with Jewish ideas, and there's nothing wrong with that. But its main purpose is self-improvement. That's what its main purpose is. So that's what we call neutral. There was something which was called transcendental meditation, which was more in the first category. And in 1979, the Rebbe spoke about it. And he spoke then a lot about meditation, but he said it was imperative on Jewish scholars to come up with a form of what's called kosher meditation in order to be able to give people that are involved in TM something positive to focus on. But that's not even what we're talking about. What we're talking about is something which is organically Jewish. Organically Jewish is something which is part of the Jewish practice, part of the Jewish text, part of the Jewish tradition, as we will explore tonight. That's fine, as long as people can see the books. Yeah. I think you should do the yellow lights, maybe, yeah. Yeah, will that help you see that? Okay, very good, because we're gonna play some videos. So remember, Jewish meditation, its main purpose is to find us, to give us the ability to become a conduit to bring the light of godliness into the world. That's really what it is. Now, in Jewish meditation, there are also 3 categories, and we're going to get to that. This is very important for us to understand because we're going to be touching on all 3 of these throughout the 6 weeks. The first one is called hitbodedut, which means seclusion. And that's a kind of transcendence meditation where the person leaves their environment and goes into a totally different environment. You can find that sometimes that by the Rebbes, that in the middle of the day, they would sort of, even with their eyes open, they would disappear and they were in a different world. Their physical body was there, but their soul and their heart and mind were in a different place. And even if you would shake them or touch them, they were unresponsive, and they would stand in the room and they would be in a totally different place. That's called hitbodedut. Hitbodedut comes from the word bidud. Bidud today is a very common word in Hebrew because that's what doctors tell people to do if they test positive for COVID, to go into quarantine. So the word is bidud. Hitbodedut means to self-quarantine, to go into seclusion, to be alone with your own thoughts and to transcend what you're doing. So that's one form of meditation. Yeah.
But wouldn't it be more effective if you remove yourself from society? And just like Abraham did, and did not stay within society, so when you went into seclusion, you didn't have all the influences surrounding you.
Let me repeat the question for benefit of everybody. Isn't the meditation of the transcendence meditation, the Bodhidut, a proper way, just like Abraham did it? And there is benefit to it, but it's not the purpose. And the reason why it's not the purpose is even Abraham changed after a while, because Abraham did that mostly when he was first discovering God. After that, what did Abraham do? He went around the world, or his environment, which was called his world, and it says that he proclaimed the presence of God all over the world. So the idea was that he realized that he has to be an instrument of light rather than being in seclusion. So at times you do need seclusion, but it can't be a permanent practice. Hitbonenut, on the other hand, which is the second quality that we're talking about, that's something that you don't have to go out into the woods. You don't have to go out into the forest. You don't have to go out into outer space. You can be in your own environment, and you can do that as well. But you need to have a tremendous amount of mind control and focus, which is the contemplative meditation, to contemplate an idea. And that was the example that I gave before with the Hasidic people that would worship God in such a way, in a contemplative way, where they would study something and then the study would become their focal point, and that became the idea that resonated in their prayer. And it's hitbonenut means to contemplate and to really connect with it. So we're going to have some examples even tonight of hitbonenut. And then there's the third one, which is called Kavanah. Kavanah is mindfulness, or to have intent. and it's an intentful meditation. Just let me explain the word Kavanah for a second. Kavanah is used by prayer, and it's also used by doing mitzvot. So the Mishnah asked the question: if somebody recites the Shema and has no Kavanah, did they fulfill their obligation? What does that mean? There are some people that do it by rote. They have practiced the words, they know it so well, so when they sit down, the words just come out of their mouth. But to say that their mind was engaged in that, not necessarily. There's a story where a rabbi that the congregation was doing the Amidah, the silent prayer, and the rabbi refused for that prayer. He didn't pray. He was just examining all of the congregants. And he went over to one of them, who was a businessman, and as soon as he finished the prayer, he gave him his hand, he extended his hand, and he said, Shalom Aleichem, welcome back from your journey. And the man looked at him and he said, I hadn't gone anywhere. I was here the whole time. He says, yeah, but I was watching you and I recognized that you were thinking about all the past and future business trips that you have to take. So you were in Hong Kong, you were in London, you were in Melbourne, you were in different places during your prayer. So even though you recited your words, but your mind was elsewhere. Now that you've come back, I have to welcome you back. So Kavanah is that when you're saying the words, you actually have intent. You're thinking about the words. Now, you can think it at many levels. You can think of it just a simple translation of the words, the simple meaning of the words, which is called Pirush Hamilot, the explanation of the words that you're saying. Or you can have a deeper level of Kavanah, like if you're studying before something deeper and you can see how these words are actually expressing a deeper concept. And we're going to have an exercise that we're going to do together before you leave tonight. We're going to take some of the morning blessings that people recite routinely and see that there are different layers to the blessing. It's either in the simple meaning or a deeper level of Kavanah. Now, we're going to go through 6 different exercises over the 6 weeks. The first one is called mind control, and that's tonight. We will be learning about a mind control exercise that helps us overcome negative feelings and emotions and to be able to create positivity. The next week, we will be learning about spirituality, and that's called Mind Yourself. That will have the 2 exercises of Hitbodedut, of seclusion, and also of Hitbonenut meditation. We're going to learn how meditation can help us experience the spirituality that's in everything. And lesson 3 is going to be living with the moment. We'll be learning the depth of mindfulness, that we can be present to the moment. That's why it's called mastermind. Lesson number 4 will have Hitbonenut and Kavanah, and that will be able to bring practical exercises of meditations in everyday living. So we can find that everything that we actually experience has hashgacha pratit, that has divine providence and has a meaning that is part of us. And lesson number 5, we will also learn how we can find purpose, which leads to joy in every encounter. And it could be business encounters, it could be professional encounters, and that comes through Hitbonenut meditation. And then in the 6th one, we're going to learn about action, how all of this comes to action. So each one is going to have its own purpose. So the first thing we're going to do is going to be mind control. That's going to be the exercise that we're going to do tonight. As I mentioned before, one of the most common reasons that psychologists say that people are interested in meditation is because they want to reduce negative experiences or the effect of it or the stress that it causes them. Others are looking for ways to be happy. Other people are saying, okay, I live a nice life, but sometimes life throws me some unwanted lemons, and I want to know how to make lemonade out of it. Some people have self-doubt, some people don't have self-confidence, so they're looking for meditation. So what we're going to do tonight is going to focus on a practice of how to be able to rid ourselves of negative emotions and negative thoughts and to be able to fill it with positive stuff. And in order to do that, I need everybody that's watching me or participating virtually or in person to think about a negative experience that you had in the recent month, something that really bothered you. It could be an encounter with someone else, it could be professional, it could be personal, but it really upset you. And then think about the impact that it resulted. In other words, the impact that it had on your feelings, how you felt about it. And you don't have to tell me what it is. I just want you to focus on it. And unfortunately, we're all blessed with that we can have an experience with somebody that leaves us wanting and wondering, and it really is upsetting. And then we think about how we reacted to it. Not only that, sometimes when we think about it again, it makes us all upset again. If it was a feeling of anger, we can become angry again. It was of a feeling of sadness, we can become sad again. If it was a feeling of being hurt, we can feel hurt again because it reoccurs again and again. We're re-experiencing as it was before. So the good news in Judaism is that we have something which is called mind control. And that's not somebody else controlling our mind. That's we ourselves that can be in control. So the first thing we're going to do is use the text of the Torah to prove it that we have control over how we feel. And how is that? So I don't know how many of you have ever been in the military and were on the front lines, or I don't know how many of you have been in cities where you felt that you're about to be invaded. There's a lot of talk now about Russia invading Ukraine. One of the reports that's coming out is that the Ukrainians are preparing, but they're also not panicking, which is the first sign that they're panicking. It's very difficult for us to understand it unless you experienced it. But if you experienced it, people that lived through World War II, even people that weren't in the Holocaust itself, but they lived in England and they saw the enemy planes coming and bombing them, or people living in Israel and knowing that a terrorist bomb can come off, or living through one of the wars, it could be mind-boggling. Now, what happens if you're going into war? Now, going into war is more, as much as you train, there is still a nervousness within you. So we find something very interesting, and this is actually, according to the Rambam, a mitzvah in the Torah. Look at text 3. Now we actually are coming to text 3 on page 8. This is taken from Deuteronomy. It speaks when the people of Israel are going out to war and they have to fight. It could be a defensive war that they're under attack. Or it could be a war where they need to do it because it's a mitzvah for them to do it. So what does the Torah say? As you approach the battle, the Kohen was the equivalent of the chaplain, shall come near and speak to the people. He shall say to them, hear Israel, today you're approaching the battle against your enemies. Do not be discouraged. Do not be afraid. Do not be alarmed or terrified because of them. The Rambam, Maimonides, when he is enumerating the mitzvah, says that actually it's a sin for someone to be fearful. And if someone is truly fearful, the Torah says they're asked to leave the battle line. They're asked to leave. Because if they're fearful, they can cause other people to be fearful. So it's a transgression to be afraid. And you definitely cannot make other people afraid. And if you're afraid, leave the front. It's very unusual in an army, because in an army, usually if someone is afraid, they're punished. But here it says just leave. So what is the text saying here? The text is saying here that the Kohen can demand from the people going into battle that they should stop being afraid. Now, obviously, when you're dealing with a child, you're walking with a child down the street, the child sees an animal that it's afraid of, and you say to the child, don't be afraid, as much as you'll say to the child, It's not going to help much. But an adult, what does an adult do? An adult starts to meditate. An adult starts to think. An adult starts to examine the situation. And one thing that anyone that trains you, if you're hiking out in the woods, if you're on a trail and you encounter a bear, the first thing that they say is remain calm and don't panic, because the animal can sense it, right? So over there also, the guide is saying you have to take mind control. And then it says what you need to do in order to scare off the animal. Same thing as when you're going into war. What does this mean? This means that in Judaism and true in society, there is this notion and this concept that we have the ability to control our mind and to control our feelings. Now, we're going to learn this mechanism and try to understand what this is all about. So we're going to go through this whole mechanism, not because this helps us and enables us to actually do it. So here's the thing. We have something which is called mind and heart. In Kabbalah, this is blocking me, but I can't do anything about it. In Kabbalah, you have this chart that you see up on the screen. This chart is what's called the 10 Sefirot, right? The first one on the right is wisdom. It's called Chachma. The one on the left is Bina. The one in the center is Dat. Those are the three intellectual ones. They're called the intellect. That forms the three compartments in the brain. And then you have the emotional ones. You have Chesed, which is kindness or love, Gevura, which is strength, withdrawal, Tiferet, which is compassion, and so on and so forth. Now is not the time to go through this, but here's the deal. Why do we have these 10 Sefirot? What's the idea of the 10 Sefirot? Where do they come from? Actually, if you are familiar with the Chabad prayer book, you will note that Friday evening, before Mincha, we recite a prayer from the Zohar, which is in the name of Elijah the prophet. And over there he says that God is beyond numbers. God is one and one and only. But in order for God to create the world, and that there should be distinct entities in the world, and there should be division in the world. Division doesn't mean divisiveness, but division means that there are different kinds of creations. There are people, there are animals, and amongst people, there are different kinds of people. Amongst animals, there are different animals. There's the vegetable, the plant life, the mineral, and all of that. So there had to be this kind of light that's refracted in order to create these different levels. And when the light is refracted, it's refracted in 10 powers. And the 10 powers are 3 intellectual and 7 emotional, for the purpose of our conversation. Now we know that the human was created in the image of God. That's what it says. The human was created in the image of God. So just as God reveals his divine energy and light in this refracted way of the 10 functions, similarly, the human soul also operates on an operating system of these 10 functions, and is divided by the intellect and the emotions. Now, it's very important to mention that the intellect of every person varies. Some people are more right brain, some people are more left brain, some people are more center, some people have the strength of both. Same thing is true with their emotions. And the reason that I'm saying that is because we will soon see that for someone to be able to change their intellect or to change their emotions is a lifelong journey. It's not easy. So we're going to say, so how is their mind control? So one thing we know that this is like a chain. In other words, the intellect is supposed to control the emotions. The difference between a child and a grown-up is a child is not fully developed yet. So by a child, the emotions control their life. And as they get older, their intellect is there to rationalize their emotions. But when they become a true grown-up, then it's reversed the way it should be. And that is that the mind needs to control and guide the emotions. And this is what we find on page 11 in text 4. from Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, where he says the human soul is divided into two categories: intelligence and emotions, which are the intellectual faculties, which are chachma, which is wisdom, bina, which is understanding, and dat, which is knowledge. And they're referred to as the mothers and the source of the emotions. Just like a mother gives birth to a child, the intellect gives birth to the emotional feeling. For the emotions are the offsprings of the intelligence. What's he saying here? The truth of the matter is that emotions are not an offspring from intelligence. The proof to that is that a child whose intelligence is not yet developed has very strong emotions. But what he's saying here is that when the adult comes to true adulthood and the adult is mature, so then it has to come to a point that their emotions are totally guided by their intellect. So if they're going to develop a feeling of love, it comes after thoughtfulness and mindfulness. So the mind is able to control the heart. So in a correct world, in a good world, in a perfect world, the intellect of the person is totally in control. And when they see things and their neurons start to work, they process it and then they develop the emotions. But the reality is that it's not so simple. It's not so easy. There's a story which I'm going to mention a little later. So if I don't, remind me. The story is about Rabbi Moshe Meislish, who was a disciple of Rabbi Shneur Zalman, and we'll get there in a minute. So, in a perfect world, the intellect is what controls the emotions. So when we bring it down to meditation, what would meditation do? Meditation is you activate the wisdom. The wisdom is the concept. And then you meditate with the contemplative idea, which is the bina, which is the analysis. The right brain gives you the idea, the left brain analyzes it, and then the dot connects with it, and then you have good emotions. So a true intellect, if you're walking up the Appalachian Trail, or Appalachian Trail, whichever way you say it, and you come face to face with a bear, so your mind starts to process, okay, there's a difference between a black bear and a brown bear. There's a difference between an aggressive bear and an unaggressive bear. There's a difference whether it's a mother bear that has her cubs that she's ready to protect or not. Okay, that's the way it works in a normal way. That's the way it should work. The reality is that it doesn't work that way. The reality is that when something happens very fast, it happens fast and furious. So you have to be able to control it. And then you don't have time to engage the intellect to develop the emotions. So how do we do that? Because the idea here is the following, that just as we have these 10 powers, which are the 10 functions, they cannot function without garments. And the garments are the tool. And the 3 garments are thinking, which is thought, speech, and action. Let me, oops, too quick. Let's talk about this for a second, and then we'll get to the meditation. Are you guys following me so far? Everybody following me online? Otherwise, speak up. Okay. Let's say you have a computer. The brain of the computer is on the chip of the computer, right? And that processes all the information and it thinks and it computes. If you just have a computer standing there, that's the functions of it. It has different functions. But if you don't have the garments, you can't do anything with it. What are the garments? The keypad, for instance, or the keyboard is a garment because that accesses the brain. The screen is a garment because the screen allows you to see what the computer is thinking. The printer, when you're printing out a document, is actually another garment because it's bringing it out. The same thing as if you have a smartphone and you have applications on the smartphone, you need to have a screen with which to see the applications. But let's say your screen is not working, the garment is not there, you can't access the applications. Similarly, in a human being has all these functions, but we have to have garments. The access of the intellect is with the thinking. You're thinking, and with that, you're engaging your brain. The thinking is also engaging your emotions. The speaking is another garment, because when you're speaking intellectual ideas, it becomes a garment. What's the idea of a garment? The idea of a garment is a conduit through which something can be expressed. That's what the idea of a garment is. Why is it called a garment? It's called a garment for another reason as well, because a garment can be changed. You're wearing a certain uniform for work, and when you come home, you want to be in comfortable clothes. You get out of the uniform, you get into comfortable clothes. You're going to the gym, you're not going to go exercise in your work clothes if you're wearing a fancy outfit. You're going to do is put on gym clothes, right? So what's the idea? A garment can be changed, but the garment is what accesses the mind and the inner functions, right? So here's what we're going to say. The mind control is not coming through the intellect, working on the emotions, because that's a very deep, lifelong mission. And that's not what we're talking about here. Meditation alone cannot do that. That comes through a lot of hard work. Meditation is dealing with the thoughts that you have. And the thoughts that you have is what's producing the feeling. Because when you're thinking about something negative, it'll evoke and trigger negative emotions. If you're thinking about something positive, it'll have positive emotions. If somebody upset you, think about it as a phone call. If you get a nasty phone call and someone is yelling at you, what do? You can either listen or you can hang up the phone. You can do the same thing with the thought. In fact, if you read Hebrew, you will see that the first words in the Hebrew text is what Rabbi Leibel Wolf just mentioned. Ki hamoach shalit al halev. The mind controls the heart and it determines what feelings you have. So let's read the text. The mind naturally controls the heart. Humans were created from birth with the ability to exercise willpower to control the drives of our hearts so they do not be expressed in our behavior, speech, or thought. We are able to divert our attention completely from things our heart crave to something entirely different. Now, Rabbi Shneur Zalman is talking there about people that are afflicted with temptations, which leads them to do actions which are not exactly good. So over there, he says that you have the ability to control what your feelings are and what your experiences are. The same thing is true with negative thoughts. If someone is obsessing about an experience that they had, which is really bothering them, and they cannot get out of it, they have this ability through this meditation, through this exercise, to be able to do that. What they don't necessarily have the control is to stop thinking, because thinking happens all the time. We have thousands of thoughts a day, but we can control what we allow in, what we don't allow in. I want to take us to the next step, since time is running out, of a letter that was written by the third Chabad Rebbe to his mechutin, which is a very powerful letter. The man was healthy and financially well off, but he had other hardships that he experienced. And he wrote a letter to the Rebbe, to the Tzemach Tzedek, whose name was also like our Rebbe. And he said, I pray a lot, but it's not helping me. And how do I change my negative thoughts? So let's give a look, page 14, text 6. Now, this letter is going to be read in several parts. We're only reading the first part of the letter now. It says the following: even if we are emotionally afraid, we are able to divorce our thought, speech, and action from that emotion. The essential thing is not to contemplate or discuss the fear at all, but to do the perfect opposite. We will soon explain what that means. You can't suppress a thought. A Russian scientist once did an experiment, and he said to his students, stop thinking about the polar bear for the next 5 minutes. Are you able to do that? If I tell you, stop thinking about the polar bear for the next 5 minutes, that's all you're thinking about. So that's not what we're talking about. What he's saying is that we have to do the opposite. Immediately upon letting go of the thought entirely, the fear will dissolve on its own. At the very least, it will become instantly dormant and not felt in the body. Then over the course of several days, it will completely dissolve to the point that it will not enter our mind at all. Removal of the thought leads to the dissipation of the fear, because emotions are entirely reliant upon intellectual focus for their existence, which requires active thought. Therefore, by removing our thoughts from matter, the intellectual power is withdrawn from the emotion, with the result that the emotion ceases to be activated. Now, over here, we're just talking about removing the negative thoughts. Soon we're talking about how we do that by replacing it with something positive. Then he says it's worth training yourself to remove all negativity, for we must rid ourselves from all fear, including justifiable fear, as I wrote. This is certainly true in your case, where there is nothing to worry about whatsoever, thank God, in terms of your health or your financial situation. Yes.
So like, I feel like replacing a thought with like a better thought for a worse thought. It's not actually dealing with the problem. It's kind of just like, okay, let's not think about this right now. Let's think something else. It's constantly going to be underlying. So like, you're not actually dealing with it. You're just like replacing it, and it will keep on coming up.
Let me repeat the question, because it's a very powerful question. And it's a very good question. The question is, it seems that everything we're talking about here is just about your feelings and how to deal with your feelings, but not how to deal with the problem. Wouldn't it be better to fix the problem?
Or even if it's not fixable, like your feelings towards the situation.
Let me just explain. The truth of the matter is that when someone faces a problem and they're involved and engaged in taking care of the problem, then they don't have fear. Then they don't have this issue. The very fact that they're engaged in a positive way in how to deal with that, they don't have this issue. We're talking about people that are paralyzed by fear, or people that are obsessing about negativity the whole time. Let's say somebody is angry at another person because the other person annoyed them, but they don't have the guts, they don't have the courage to go and tell that person that you're really annoying me, either because they're afraid of them or they don't want to make them feel uncomfortable. So they're not ready to deal with fixing it. But how do they deal with themselves at that time? Maybe it's not right for them to do it at this point. They'll have to do it at another time. So that's what the idea is. The idea is how to get rid of the negative feelings. Of course, if you have a problem and you're working on the problem and fixing it, this issue is not an issue. Absolutely. It's not even something that we have to deal with. If you're thirsty and you need water, you're not going to say, oh, I'm so thirsty. What am I going to do? I have no water. You're going to go get water, right? So we have to put it into context. We have to understand that there's sometimes problems that we feel that we cannot solve, or that not ready to be solved, or they're not, or we don't, or somebody else has to solve them. How do we deal with it at this time? That's the question. Somebody sent me a chat question. I think I repeated the question. The question was, it's speaking about how to deal with fear, but not how to deal with the problem. So that's something which is obvious. We're talking about someone that is now overtaken by fears and worries. You know, you have people that are very big worriers. They worry and worry and worry all the time, right? We have people that worry all the time, and they can't get rid of their worries, and they're the ones that are seeking meditation. We have people that have a negative view of the world. They always see the other person as an antagonist, or they see that the world is out to get them. There are all kinds of issues that are there that cause people stress. Okay, there are questions out there coming, and please type your message unless you can unmute yourself.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Scott.
I understand what you're proposing, and it deals primarily with a single thought. My experience is that people become more and more overwhelmed as multiple negative thoughts accumulate. As you said, they don't just worry about A or B, but they start to worry about everything. And the overwhelm that person feels, it requires tremendous strength to pull out each individual negative thought and lay it out and deal with it and change it through introducing a positive thought to discharge that negative emotion. But most people have a variety of negative things going on at one time. Multiple.
So, yeah, I understand, but my argument to you is that there is the one underlying principle, and that is the negative attitude. And apparently, the person that wrote the letter to the Rebbe was going through exactly that. They felt overwhelmed by the world, and therefore it produced multiple negative thoughts. And what he was saying to him was that your attitude has to change by starting to look at the world in a positive way. And it's actually in text 7, because as I said, I want to read text 7, then we're going to go finish your answer, the answer that I have for you. If you look at page 16, the primary method of removing worrying thoughts, see, it says in the plural, from your mind is by redirecting your mind towards other matters. You can replace them with thoughts of necessary material matters that bring you joy, and you can contemplate God's Torah that delights the heart. The latter is best achieved through creating a fixed schedule of daily Torah study, which is particularly effective with a study partner. What are we talking about here? What we're talking about here is, if a person has one negative thought that hits them, usually they don't turn to meditation to remedy that. They deal with it. We're talking about people that their attitude in general is one that produces negative thoughts, that they see everything in a negative light. So if their flight is delayed, the worst has happened. If they're traveling and there's a detour and they have to go through a small town instead of driving down the highway, they're very upset. If they ordered a package from Amazon and they needed it for this day and it didn't come, they're now very upset. So what happens is that it cascades because they're allowing all these emotional thoughts to capture them. Now, the truth of the matter is it's all about the attitude. And that's what we're saying. If one, and we're going to learn it in the future courses, like about the divine providence, sometimes what happens is that when you take a detour, you suddenly are able to see things that you didn't see before. When somebody is, there's the famous statement from Helen Keller that she used to ask people that took a hike in the woods, what did you see today? And they said nothing in particular. And she said, that's the problem with people that see. They don't see anything. The truth of the matter is that someone that's blind is so thirsty and hungry to know what they're seeing, so they are observant of things that they didn't know exist before, or they make the other person observant of that. We find that even in the negative, there is a positive, which actually we can grow from. It can actually bring us about a better way. Another example is that if you see a negative behavior in another person, the Baal Shem Tov used to say, when you look at another person, it's like looking in a mirror. So if you see a negative behavior in the other person, it means that maybe there's something negative in oneself that needs to be repaired. Of course, if it's a person that's a friend of yours, you have to try to talk to them and help them. But this whole idea of having the negative view, it doesn't mean to make light of negative people. We know that there's negativity out there. We know that there are bad people out there. But the question is, how does that affect us? Does that pull us down, that we become sad and we sulk? Or do we have the attitude that we have to turn it around and see the positivity in the world? And this is what the Tzemach Tzedek is actually suggesting here, is that we change it with positive ideas. It doesn't mean that we become oblivious to the negativity that's there, but we want to be able to meditate on a positive thing. The positive thought takes away the worry that overwhelms us. Sometimes when a person faces a negative situation, it brings out a fight in them. Sometimes when a person brings out a negative situation, they become full of despair. And I think, speaking in today's times, when we have just marked close to 2 years of dealing with the COVID and all the ramifications, and many of us, including myself and others sitting here in the audience, have lost loved ones and gone through terrible, painful times through it. But we have a choice. We have a choice whether it drags us down and we become despondent and fill ourselves with negativity, or we say, well, let us become a light unto others that are suffering and help them deal with the situation. So it's a choice that we have. So even though we're not changing our intellect, our emotions inside, but we're using the garments to control how we react to things. I hope that explains a little bit more.
Yeah, I do have a follow-up on that, if I could.
Okay.
Which is, I'm hearing you describe individual thoughts and feelings. And it reminds me of every time I meet you, I feel a very positive feeling because you've immersed yourself in this study and have spent a lifetime combating negative thoughts and trying to remain positive. For the average person, they tend to become, over time, inured in whatever thoughts they have. So it's not as simple as saying you're having a negative thought about being late today or something someone said to you. Your whole worldview feels drained down, and one individual solution doesn't feel adequate. I think it's why people go to therapy.
Okay, Scott, let me just go and go straight to the point. Everything is made up of building blocks. I'm not saying that if somebody is suffering from deep depression that they shouldn't go to a therapist. Nowhere. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about here is, how do you allow yourself to be lifted up with a positive idea? How can you change direction? How can you, if you're at a crossroads and you find yourself falling into the trap of negativity and you're trying to lift yourself and elevate yourself? Now, there are some people that need help from others. Absolutely, there's no question. The Talmud says a prisoner cannot free themselves, liberate themselves. You need to speak to others. And in fact, it says in the Tanakh, if a person has a worry, and there are two opinions what it means. One opinion is they should throw the thought away and fill it with positive. But another opinion, which doesn't argue, but says that at times you have to speak to someone to help you. Even the Tzemach Tzedek here in his letter says that even if you're going to study Torah, it'll be so much more helpful to study it with another person. In other words, to find another person to help you. What the point of the matter is of meditation is to focus. And I want to go back to the building blocks. And there's one more video from Label Wolf that I think we need to watch because he brings it full circle. And that is, there's a story with Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was a shepherd, a poor shepherd, married at the age of 40, and he was a total ignoramus. He did not know how to read. He did not know how to write. But he had a brain. He was intellectual. And his wife, Rachel, recognized that. So she told him that you must go study, and I will find a way to support you. In fact, she had long, beautiful hair that she'd sold so someone could make a wig out of it. She used that money to help him buy his way to Jerusalem for transportation. Now, when he came to Jerusalem, there were several stories that happened, but I want to focus only on one. When he walked into the study hall and he saw 18-year-olds studying the Mishnah and the Talmud in great depth and studying the nuances of law in subject matter that he was totally unfamiliar with, He turned around and he said, I can't do that. So his teacher said, no, 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 no. How do you think these students got here? They use building blocks. The building blocks are the letters. So first he taught him the Hebrew alphabet. He taught him how to compose words, taught him how to write. Then he began to teach him concepts. And slowly but surely, by building his vocabulary, building his knowledge, building the ideas, he was able to far exceed everyone else until he became the leader in his generation that the Talmud says, Kula alam liba Rabbi Akiva, that all the sages that came after him basically designed their Torah study according to the way Rabbi Akiva taught. So we all have that ability. We have to have a starting point. I remember the Rebbe was once speaking about it, and he was speaking in the 70s. There was high crime in the United States. There were a lot of issues going on in the world. There was anti-Semitism like there is today. People were very anti-Israel. And the Rebbe said that the pasuk, the verse in Shir Hashirim, the verse that's in the Torah says, Basi Lugani, that God says, I've come to my place of the light, which is this physical world. The world is not a jungle. It has the option to be either way, but we have to see the world as a positive place. And by instilling that, we actually do that. And I want you to look at page 17, because this is even a more powerful statement with which the Tzemach Tzedek finishes his letter. He said it has a positive effect. Let's read text 8. He says, to the contrary, you should speak and act in a manner that projects positivity, as described above, so that these positive emotions will be established within you. In this way, a spirit of joy and good-heartedness will descend upon you from above. I say this on the basis of a teaching I received from my holy grandfather of blessed memory, who shared an insight authored by Rabbi Dov Ber, the Maggid of Mezrich, into the verse, like a person's appearance upon it from above. The Maggid would read the verse this way: according to the feelings a person displays down here in this world, like a person's appearance, so is the nature of that which rests upon the person from above. In light of this teaching, my grandfather, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Ladi, did not permit me to sing a melancholy tune during the evening prayer. After I've completed the prayer, he explained his reasoning for objecting to my choice of melody and shared the above insight in the name of the Maggid of the blessed memory. The story was, this was the last night of the life of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. He was in a village escaping the invading armies at that time in Russia, and he got very sick. And his grandson was with him, and his grandson was so upset about the illness of his grandfather that he began to pray with a melancholy tune. And his grandfather said, no, he said, be joyous. Because if you're joyous, we will be surrounded by joy, even though he was very sick at the time. So the point of the matter is, there's no magic here, but what we believe very strong is that you can create an environment around you. Furthermore, when we talk about the functions that we mentioned before with the graph of the intellectual and the emotional, so you see on the screen that they're all listed from wisdom down to royalty. But I'm going to touch on two: kindness and severity. The soul has kindness as well. The soul, when we act kindness, it begets kindness. There's a lot of stories, and even now they have YouTube films that if you do one act of kindness to one person, that will generate that person should do other kindness to others and to others and to others. So you create an environment of kindness. Where on the other hand, if you're rude to someone, so then it causes other people to be rude to others as well. So everything has consequences. We shape how we feel. Now, again, this is not in place of psychotherapy. This is not in place of someone that needs real psychological help. We're talking about people in general that feel down because of what's going on in the world, of what's going on in their families, what's going on around them, how they're able to create a positive environment. And that takes meditation. What is the meditation that we're talking about here? It's not to change and calibrate your mind how it works, or recalibrate your emotions, because that's a lifelong effort. It's talking about to reframe the garments, because the garments are the key to allow which thoughts come into your mind. And the mind can control emotions. There's a story I wanted to tell you before about Rav Moshe Meislish, that in the Franco-Russo War, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi supported the Russians, and there were many Jews that supported the French. We're not going to go into now why one supported one and the other one supported the other, but the Alter Rebbe had a chassid, a disciple by the name of Moshe Meislish, who was a linguist, and he was quite fluent in many languages, including French and Russian and German and Latin, and he was very intellectual, and he inserted himself into the French camp just to learn what's going on there. And he befriended a lot of the French generals. And one day Napoleon ran in to where they were meeting, and he said, there's a spy amongst you, everybody against the wall. And he took the palm of his hand to feel the pulse of everybody. Now, if you're not a spy, you wouldn't be nervous because you're clean. And he figured he'll catch the spy that way. He went over once, twice, and he couldn't find it. And at that time, Rav Moshe knew that he had to leave. So they asked him, when he told the story, how were you able to keep control? So he says, the teachings that Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi taught, which we read before, the quotation of the Zohar, that the mind controls the heart, I worked on it for 7 years to be able to teach myself how the mind dictates the emotions. And because of that, I was able to remain calm. Now, none of us can expect to be at that level. But in ordinary situations, we should have that ability to do that. And that's what we're saying, that the meditation is to meditate on a positive thing. So before prayer, you actually, what I would say, instead of focusing on the smallness of the human being and saying we're nothing, because that's not going to accomplish anything, focus on the greatness of God. What does it mean, the greatness of God? You study a little bit of Hasidus, and you study the revelation of God in this world and how many forms it comes in. It comes in an infinite way, in a finite way, and how God blends it all together, and how God is beyond what we can contemplate, but yet he reveals these energies in a very specific way. And you start studying it through the text, you're suddenly uplifted because you feel part of something vast. You feel part of something big. And here you, as a human being, have the ability to approach God and to make that connection. Just before we finish, I want you to look after the appendix. I think the last page is 28. And then after that, you should have a section called Count Your Blessings. Okay. We in Judaism have something very interesting, that every morning when we wake up, we recite different blessings. And I want to show you a meditation. If you read the blessing on the surface, what it means, or on a deeper level. So one blessing is the rooster blessing. The rooster blessing was the old alarm clock. Before we had alarm clocks, the rooster used to wake us up. So we have a blessing that says, blessed are you, God, King of the universe, who grants the rooster the understanding to distinguish between day and night. So it reads the following: before electrical alarm clocks, people relied on nature's alarm clock, the rooster, to awaken them at dawn. This blessing was a way to thank God for providing a reliable method of timely arousal from sleep. As we recite the blessing today, we bear in mind, A, whichever of God's marvels we use to wake up each morning, and B, the diverse wonders of nature found in the animal kingdom. But if we go a little deeper, let's see the deeper meditation. Each prayer offers multiple layers of significance. A deeper insight notes that the text employs the rare Hebrew term for rooster, which is a sechbi, which is an uncommon way of saying the word rooster, which carries an alternate translation, heart. We thank God for granting us the mental and emotional capacity to distinguish between moral day and night, between that which is good, sacred, and worthy, and the opposite. This is a morning blessing to remind us that throughout our day, we will face choices that require a moral compass and an inner strength to embrace the good and distance ourselves from the opposite. So here you have an example. You have one blessing that everybody recites every day, and they just think about the alarm clock or the rooster. But really, it has much deeper meaning. Similarly, I mentioned the Helen Keller story, but here's the way it says, the vision blessing. So we have a blessing number 2. Blessed are you, God, King of the universe, who opens the eyes of the blind. The human eye is an astonishing, complex organ. To avoid taking this major miracle for granted, we thank God each day for the blessing of sight. So when we wake up, we open up our eyes and we can see, we recite that blessing. Helen Keller famously said, recently I was visited by a very good friend who had just returned from a long walk in the woods. And I asked her what she had observed. Nothing in particular, she replied. I might have been incredulous had I not been accustomed to such responses. For long ago, I became convinced that the seeing see little. A Hasidic deeper insight views this blessing as an addressing the gift of being able to see the bigger picture. Poor decisions are often due to short-sightedness or a failure to see beneath the surface. Conversely, positive and divine choices arrive upon exercising our mental ability to view the larger truth, a truly valuable gift. I'll read another few just before we finish. And that is the blessing for releasing the bound. This is actually a blessing that was composed for anyone that was imprisoned. And in the olden days, it was not uncommon for people to be thrown into prison for any reason. So when they came out, they would recite this blessing. But we do this every morning because our limbs barely move or stretch as we sleep. We largely appear as we are bound. Upon awakening, we begin to move and stretch, and we thank God for the gift of movement. A deeper insight sees this as a reference to the battle between the two souls within us. Our natural impulsive soul that holds a greater grip on our conscious character and daily choices. By contrast, our pristine divine soul is largely a prisoner of the former. The divine soul longs to find joy in sacred endeavors, but is shackled by our animalistic impulses and goals. There are moments, however, when our divine soul succeeds in breaking free from captivity, and it shines through our noble deeds. Our ability to tip the scales in favor of our divine soul is a gift from God. Each morning, we thank God for the power to overcome our basic instincts to act in accordance with our divine core. You can read the other examples as well, but the point of the matter is, when we meditate on deeper ideas, we can see the positive message that's there subliminally. We can internalize it, and when we internalize it, it actually changes everything. And these are the takeaways. Number one, we have to be aware and in control of our thoughts. If we have extra time, invest it in wholesome things, not in wasteful things. One thing that we find is that
Lesson 1. Do you mind?
when people, sorry about that, when people waste time and they just do nothing, usually what happens is that it fills with negativity. There's a statement that says in the book of Genesis, and that is that when the brothers of Joseph were upset with him and they threw him into a pit, so it says the pit had no water, but it had snakes and scorpions. And the sages interpret it that our mind can become like a pit. We can either fill it with water, which the Torah is likened to water, positive ideas, contemplative ideas, refreshing ideas, or we leave it empty. And if we leave it empty, it gets filled with negativity, which are snakes and scorpions. And that is the choice that we have.
There was
Yes.
no TV in the pit.
What?
There was no television in the pit.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We will see you next week, and next week we'll take it to a deeper level. I appreciate everybody that was online, and please, your questions are quite important. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yossi.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate your questions.